Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so excited for today's episode because we are joined by a very intentional and strategic thinker that in all the midst of all the hats that we have to wear in our businesses, I am absolutely convinced that this guy, this guest, this fellow entrepreneur, he understands what it's like to be in the midst of the chaos, but importantly, take that step back, really analyze the landscape and make smart, strategic decisions from a place of clarity. So let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Michael McGinty. Michael empowers organizations to transform that complexity into clarity. Through strategic insight, technical precision, and trusted leadership, he guides executives and teams to make confident decisions, to solve those root challenges, and to build systems that last. His mission is to drive measurable impact by aligning people, process, and purpose, elevating both performance and potential. Coming from a fast-evolving professional career on the ground with clients, Michael built FP360 around a team rolling up their sleeves to put out both literal and figurative fires and provide lasting solutions. So chances are you heard a bit of yourself in that bio. I'm so excited for all of us to learn from him. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Michael McGinty. All right, Michael, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Heck yes, there's so many topics that you and I could go into, and I know that time's going to be short, so first things first, I'm going to put the spotlight on you. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Michael? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, when I was younger, my mom and dad both worked for the airlines, so I spent a lot of time traveling, a lot of time seeing the world. I was really blessed to have that in my early life. Made me a curious kid. I like to say that's the more soft way of putting it, but I'm a huge nerd at heart. Always was interested in what was on the ground, what the birds were chirping, what the bugs were doing. So got to see a lot of the world, got to really become a more thoughtful, at least I thought when I was a younger person, and just be curious and trying to grow myself and figure out my place in life. Then, of course, I went to school, went to university, and had no idea what I wanted to do. So spent some time abroad. I got a degree in the sciences, which was always a passion of mine. But, ultimately, as my family asked me, well, what do you want to do, when you're done with school and everything, I kind of took what I did as a kid with airline parents and wanted to keep traveling. And figuring that out, but still, thankfully, having some interesting, experiences along the way that ultimately led me to a career in manufacturing. First the fisheries, but then manufacturing, and just. I always just wanted to know how things worked, always wanted to know what was going on, at that time with customers, with the fisheries, or how things worked, how systems worked. So, I've always fashioned my life as a never-ending episode of how it's made. So at the end of the day, I'm just out there trying to figure out things, and that's ultimately what led me to build what I've built now with my team and my friends, frankly. So it's just been a joy getting to this point.
Yeah, I love that overview, and I love the shout out to how I built this, because Michael, it really speaks to that childhood curiosity that you always have had. And when I think about curiosity, especially as children, when we're just poking and playing and trying to figure out how things work, I think two things happen in that. Is first and foremost, you start to realize how complex things are, how complex the world is, and how complex it is to get things to work that we probably take for granted. And then what I find so fascinating about curiosity, and I experience this as the host of this show and having as many conversations with business leaders as I do, is that the more you realize things are complex, at the same time, if you keep poking and prodding, you start to realize that things can be simple, because there are some universal patterns. There are some universal truths. Michael, I think that all of us, when we start our businesses, we feel the first side of the coin about the complexities long before we ever experience the simplicity and the patterns and the foundations that we can lean on. Talk to us about that dichotomy, because it's easier said than done. It's easy for you and I to talk about simplicity here in today's episode together, but it starts with complexity and then finding simplicity. How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to early career. So I've worked in the chemicals industry and manufacturing industry for a broad portion of the time before I started at P360. And, I was, you mentioned earlier, a firefighter. That was my informal job title. So if there was some issue at a customer, I was the technical lead to go and see, as we called it. And I find that to be the most important thing, because you get a call from someone, they're saying everything is going wrong, we don't know what's going on here, we need your help. So of course I will screen what's going on with them over the phone, but by going and seeing, you can really see that chaos as you described it. And sometimes it could be a challenge. Sometimes it's quite obvious what's going on, sometimes it's not, more often times it's not. So it's really important to be there, looking, touching, talking, and listening to those on the ground, because that helps solve those challenges. And as you said, there are patterns in the field and in our world, and what we've been doing in consulting, where again, each challenge is unique, but root cause is often driven from a lot of the same issues and a lot of the same things that we see across the board. Organizations really wanting to do better and not have these issues. And again, people being human is always a challenge, but it's who we are. So being there and being supportive and being shoulder to shoulder and rolling up your sleeves, you find out that though it seems chaotic and though there are issues that sometimes are unique, most of the time it all is drawn from the same area. And that's helped me really support, at that time, customers and now clients, and saying, well, I'm not saying one size fits all, but I really certainly have a few avenues to help drive based on, choosing my own adventure when I'm there. If this, then that. Let's dive into this. Let's see if we could simplify this. Let's see if we could first put out this fire with the short-term solution. But I want to dig to the root of this and say this complex issue is simple with these simple changes that oftentimes I can really repeat with a lot of our clients, and ultimately help them quite quickly to not only fix the problem in the short term, but preventative measures to stop it from happening later on as well.
And Michael, I feel like that really reveals something that you shared with our team off air ahead of today's conversation, is that go and see mentality. I think that, listeners have had to listen to me say for 10 years that we've been on the air. The words that I use in my own head is you have to take inventory. You can't make any improvements in any aspect of life or business until you understand the reality of it. And I've never seen it articulated so simply. Go and see. And it's so clear to me that you're willing to just hop on a plane and literally go and see. You are willing to start digging, to start to find those root causes that you talked about. Walk us through that approach, because I also love, I've heard it in the consulting world and the coaching world, that concept of you can't read the label from inside the jar. Michael, sometimes I would imagine it's easier for you to see things when you're working with businesses and clients than it is for them to see it themselves. What does that go and see process look like? How do you start to help them take that inventory that they need?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I always want to keep in mind that not everything is going to be easy, nor one size fits all. You do have to, when you get to those customers, those clients, whoever they are, understand the realities of their situation, understand that context. Even though there are some issues that are obvious, or, well, this would stop being a problem if you just stop doing that. Sometimes, whether it's capital, both financial and human, whether it's the reality of the situation, whether it's motivation, there's a lot of context that gets lost in just consulting and providing guidance. So like you said, getting inside the jar with them, showing them, and I've had a great career. I'm still young in my career, but I've learned a lot from a lot of great mentors. I have seen a lot myself. I have fixed a lot myself. I've gained kind of a toolbox of, I've seen that. I've been through this. This is a challenge and we're going to get through it. It's to be able to level with those dealing with these crazy problems, worrying that their business is going to stop or slow down or shut down, is helping relate there is what really helps me help them, helps me understand what's going on, and it helps me provide something that they can chew on and actually work with, not just, well, yeah, just do this and it's good. No, it's, listen, I get the situation, I'm here, I can see it with my own eyes, and I understand the limitations to what I'm about to say, but maybe here's a roadmap for us to start with. So it's never easy. It really isn't. And it can be challenging because I myself am a very stubborn person at times, and I like the way I do things, but I appreciate constructive feedback from people who've been through it, or at least have good intentions in discussing that with me. And that's how I try to approach these challenges with our clients too.
Yeah, and you talk about the toolbox. I want to go there with you because you obviously had an awesome career and you've talk to us a little bit about that even up to this point in the conversation. But Michael, when I think about people like you who have gone as deep and as wide in your career as you have, and then we start talking about an entrepreneurial journey, I would imagine that you felt like there were so many doors open to you of what is it that I want to start? How do I want to structure my services? How do I pick and choose what types of clients that I want to work with? Take us back to the foundations and the founding of FP360, because I imagine that you were very intentional and strategic, as you are, about the way that you structured FP360 out of the gates. Take us there.
Yeah, I always make the story back when I used to interview for various companies. I always would say that there is a story between going from the fisheries to the manufacturing world. And at the end of the day, I still make that stretch as best I can. But really, it was a really interesting thing because during that, I was an observer. I had to go out on fishing trips with colleagues all along the East Coast. And it was a really cool experience. But I had to, sell myself to people. I had the perception, I was a NOAA, fisheries observer. I was coming from the government to tell them what to do. And I always took the approach, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to police what you're doing. I'm here to do what you're here to do as well, both make a living, but also keep our living going, in this case, which is fisheries. So I learned a lot how to speak to my audience there because I'm this, Midwestern little dork going on these fishing boats with people who are third, fourth generation fishermen and women. And, at the end of the day, I really fit in well as best I could with them, sometimes had challenges there, but I learned how to, as I mentioned, speak to my audience. And I really enjoyed it and ate extremely well out on the boats with them. Nonetheless, I moved into manufacturing and that career continued where I was, like I said, that firefighter, ultimately moved into a more commercial role, which I didn't want to do because I didn't think I'd ever want to do sales. But in manufacturing, chemicals and environmental systems, there's a lot of technical sales that go with it. And I always just kept what I used to do, that problem solver mentality. So I would, fix these problems. I'd work with these clients. I would, sell them solutions, of course. That was my job. But at the end of the day, I wanted to, evolve that into something where I wanted to support our customers at that time, but support our clients now more directly, and to be able to do so on a way that here is everything, I want what's best for you, not just what's best for myself or for this organization or anything. So, what we've really fashioned ourselves as, myself, my colleagues with me at FP360, is exactly that, which are, a lot of like-minded individuals. I had first started this as an independent consultancy, and now I have colleagues who have a lot of the same story. They want to help people. They want to plug in where they can. They want to be an extension of great organizations, but helping them there and being on the ground with them and not being shackled to just say, whatever needs to be said. It's here's what needs to be done to help you. So, I've wanted to help people. I always just jumped right, feet first into it. But that path really went from doing this as a career to doing this as an independent to doing this with other like-minded independents, or we've evolved this into an organization of people who really just want to be nerds together. So.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that I often share with listeners while we're here on the air together, is that I think there's a lot of superpower to be gained from your vantage point. For example, Michael, is you don't just work inside of one company. You have worked across an incredible portfolio of clients that FP360 has helped, which means that you get to borrow and you get to learn things from different industries, from different clients, from different processes, and you get to use that across the board. I think that it's really important to call out the fact that we bring our experiences from everything we've done in life to the table and what it is that we're going to do today and also into the future. And you talk about understanding and talking to your clients. Well, Michael, I have an obligation to our listeners here because I know that everybody this year wants to talk about AI. It is obviously the elephant in most rooms, and I know that you guys don't shy away from that. And I hope that we already are in this time period here in 2026 where nobody's shying away from it, because it is a very powerful tool when used correctly. Michael, what's your take on where we are with AI? How's it factoring into what you're seeing with clients? And then, of course, internally at FP360, what's your take on AI and how it can help?
Yeah, it is an interesting and fast speeding conversation that I think changes month by month. But one of the things that helped me on, there are tools, be it, whatever tool you use, and there's many of them out there, they've helped me build myself as an independent and now as an organization better. How do we streamline our own internal tools? How do we, use our expertise, but also not be bogged down with a lot of the day-to-day that, administrative work, which is extremely important to get right and extremely important to do, but takes away from us to really be able to support our clients directly. I think of a doctor being more bogged down with insurance and having to talk to that than providing that care. We want to provide that care regularly. So internally, we do use a slew of internal tools, both AI and just general business suite tools that have allowed us to honestly build a consultancy from scratch today is a lot easier than it was many years ago, because not only we have the expertise, we have the networks, we know what industries we target and what industries we're growing in, but we've been able to really just jump right into the consulting side of things because we didn't have to necessarily build all these other tools out. As we grow and as we scale, we'll of course balance our AI tools with our staff tools and everything. But at the end of the day, it's allowed us to create a very smooth and streamlined internal process today that's allowed us to really compete in the big market and provide our knowledge economy. That being said, how we work with our clients also is a conversation. We do suggest and we do work with AI tools that will benefit them too. There are great tools out there for streamlining supply chain, for reviewing documentation, for reviewing regulatory compliance. I think the cosmetics world, I used to work with a tool that allows for very quick review of formulations to provide global compliance roadmaps, and this is something we've used with some clients as well. So there are great tools out there. How each fits in with each organization, ours included at FP360, changes by the day, the month, and as these tools evolve. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're very cautious about how they plug into the context of our clients. If it's just, a mom and pop shop or a 3,000 employee organization, introducing these tools has to have buy-in from the teams that are going to use them and partner with them. And we always make sure, as we do with our day-to-day advisory services, that if we bring in AI tools, which we think is a great thing to do, and an inevitability, is something that we make sure it is within the context of how they may or may not use them in the short term, making sure that when they adopt them, follow through and training on these tools is also given to them by our teams.
I really appreciate the way you articulate that, because I feel like we are already at this point, and you already called out the fact that this changes literally every single week. And I think that frequency and pace of changes, I believe, and I've been an entrepreneur for 17 years now, I believe that AI is the shiniest of all of the objects. And so shiny object syndrome, I would argue, is harder to resist now than it ever has been at any time period in the past. Maybe the advent of the internet, I'm not sure. I was a little too young. I just missed that wave, but maybe that was a big shiny object for businesses back then in the 90s and especially early 2000s, when it kind of became mandatory that everyone needed a website and everyone had to figure that out. But Michael, now AI is plugging all of these gaps. Now we're not just talking about having a website. We're talking about content marketing strategies. We're talking about analyzing human capital and roles and positioning and operations and processes and automations. What's your take on all those businesses? And obviously you go deep into the operational side of the world and efficiency side of the world with your clients. I know that there's a large movement out there where everyone believes, everything needs to be automated right now. What's your take on what should be automated? What should stay with humans? How do we start to make those decisions? And how do we fairly gauge that in a world where there's this super shiny object out there?
Yeah, look, I still have some clients that and colleagues, frankly, who are struggling to really pick up from the post-COVID years of using Microsoft Teams and all these tools, video conferencing, Zoom and whatnot. I still have pushback from that. Sometimes it's a challenge, myself included. I, as a joke to my colleagues that have worked well longer than me in sales, keep a roll of quarters in my glove box always in case I need to use a payphone. Finding that's probably harder than using that roll of quarters. But to go into your question, I think it's still something that's evolving, say, in manufacturing. I'll go back to that. I work with shops that have, automated, this is before, AI was a part of that picture, but automated processing, whether it was logistics, whether it was automating, just moving automotive parts through an automotive plant, whether, all that's still growing in its own right. Robotics is still being, I guess, questioned and validated out there in the field. Of course, it's growing, it's well known, and it's absolutely accepted globally now, but there are still processes that may or may not benefit from being automated in a physical and a robotic sense. So that conversation's still ongoing. I think then to that point, the utilizing AI tools to automate is also a conversation that's just begun and will continue for a lot longer. I think with robotics, I think it was more accepted more quickly. I think right now with AI, there's some question of, are these tools really going to benefit us? Is it going to really offload work to a computational program? Or am I going to have that engineer really running the programs full time? So going back to manufacturing, there are people, not as many people moving the parts through the body, but those people have been, they've been leveled up to work with the robotics themselves. So it's the same thing with AI. I look at supply chain. I look at managing costs. I look at regulatory compliance. I think these are areas where there are robust tools, and there's a lot of them, but there are very good, robust, and tested tools that can help with those sectors today. The question is, again, what does the team look like? How does that tool fit in there? And how do you manage that tool like you do a robot still? Who are going to be those engineers? Are you going to train those people? Are you going to follow through those trainings? Or just basically, say, let's have an AI tool and make someone use it, even though they've never done that. So there are areas, as I mentioned, operations, regulatory, that can be utilizing these tools today, supply chain as well. But implementation, training, and follow through is a necessity, as it was with robotics, as it was with other tools when fishing boats were utilizing more advanced technology instead of just how we did it for thousands of years.
Michael, I really appreciate the fact that you emphasize in that answer implementation. And as the host of a podcast, I literally get to talk for a living, and that's absolutely fun as an extreme extrovert like me. But one thing that I'm very cognizant of as the host of a podcast is the fact that talk is one thing, but execution is ultimately the only thing that matters. And having seen inside of as many businesses as you have, and having sat in as many meetings and cultural meetings and decisions and everything that you've witnessed in your career up to this point, where's that gap? How can we ensure, and obviously we're talking to a worldwide audience of business owners, how can we get over that gap of talking about things, conceptually understanding and making those strategic decisions, to actually following it through to implementation? I feel like you teased some of it already throughout our conversation about having the right people in the right places, but bridge that gap for us between strategy and intention all the way through to execution.
Yeah, a challenge we see in all the industries that we work with, from manufacturing to mining to biotech and pharma. I think it's not, a lot of people, probably a lot of listeners will agree with this. A lot of people in organizations have a lot on their plate, and it does not seem like that plate is getting any smaller anytime soon. So, first and foremost, we need to be able to help manage the workload of the employees that remain. And finding employees today is more difficult. Moving and shifting organizations, how things are moving within organizations, happening fast. So a lot of people feel they're taking on a lot more than their job duties, originally intended for, and are, having a challenge from management leadership to hearing that and really accepting that reality. So we need to make sure that our human resources, our people, our experts there are freed up from some of the busy work to be able to be the experts that they were brought in for, and everyone in an organization is important. So, letting these people excel in what they've been brought in for is important. But, at the end of the day, that's nice. And I think people can agree to it on paper. How do you make that happen? And getting buy-in from the top down and the bottom up is really the thing there. And it's what we excel in. Again, going back to a lot of how we approach our clients, which is, we have to make sure leadership understands that this is what it's going to do for the organization more broadly. That's what they're tasked to do. They're there to lead the ship, to be the captains of this ship, and to move that ship forward and make sure it continues on path. But there's people rowing that boat, and those people sometimes, captains don't see them regularly. They're not listening to them, and they don't see that. So when we approach leadership, we're in a boardroom versus a conference room. We're making sure that they understand what they need to do, and we train them. And we do executive leadership coaching to know that your people are going to need you to help lead them into this new world, which is, instead of oars, they're going to be using engines, and that's going to be a new world. You need to lead them into that. But then going to the ground up, we need to make sure there's buy-in there. These tools are disruptive. Whether it's AI or it's a new way of doing business or a new structure to a sales team, it is a disruptive thing. So our approach is always, we've been through it. This is, I've been through changes like this. This is what worked. What you're doing now, here's why it isn't working. Here's not even what's right and wrong. Here's how it's going to help you. Here's how it's going to help you and your team, how it's going to make that plate, lessen and not grow. So that buy-in from all stakeholders, from the top down to the bottom up, if you don't have that, nothing is going to work. You may implement a tool and put that tool through, but no one will adopt it. No one will follow through with it. So getting the buy-in, number one. Then once you have the buy-in, continuing to show them and train them and get their hands on it until that training wheels are ready to come off. And from there, it's part of their company culture. It's part of what they do. And it's been adopted, and it's as if they've always been using it. Like we went from a roll of quarters to a cell phone to Microsoft Teams. We don't think twice about that anymore. But those growing pains per organization can prevent that adoption. And that's an important thing, is to get the buy-in first.
Michael, you and I are having this conversation here at the tail end of Q1 2026, and hearing you talk about buy-in and hearing you talk about culture, it takes me all the way back to my college internships. And I remember that first summer we had a corporate team building event, and we went to an island off the coast of Boston, and we had beach volleyball was set up there and barbecues. And obviously it was a very nice event. As a college intern, I was like, dang, I'm getting paid to be here. And it was cool because I got to meet everybody across the country. But what really struck me was how different it felt from my day-to-day in my cubicle at the time. And I find that it's why I love when people talk about yoga. You don't do yoga once or twice. You practice yoga. It is a regular practice. Michael, obviously, we can use the calendar to our benefit. I'm a big fan of quarters, which is why I think in terms of the fact that you and I are talking Q1, the turn of every quarter forces me to look backwards and forward at the same time and take that inventory that I talked about. But more importantly, for all of us as business leaders and business owners, how can we turn this into a regular practice? So it's not something that we do when we get to work with experts like you, but it's something that we deeply ingrain in just the normal way that we operate.
Yeah. Well, first off, I am quite jealous of that, the internship thing you did there, because we didn't have that in mind. Although I enjoyed my internships, that sounds like a lot of fun. But second off, I think it goes back to when I was previous organization. We did this great training. It's called the Counselor Salesperson, and I've done a lot of training, sales trainings, ergonomics trainings, all these different trainings. Everyone has to do them, but I think it's become just kind of an obligation as opposed to part of the day-to-day and the quarter-to-quarter, as you mentioned. If you do one-off trainings, it's not going to stick. It's not going to stay. I think even this fantastic training we did, everyone came out of that room saying this was really helpful. One of the most helpful trainings we've done. However, one of the actual graphics they showed in that is at the end, which was we're going to have follow-up trainings because, you retain a lot of knowledge in that one-off training, but over time that knowledge goes away because you're not using it. You're not in the room for 2 days doing that training anymore, and your retention of that knowledge goes away. But if you put in a quarterly follow-up, and it doesn't have to be just sit in a room, sit on a PowerPoint presentation, but some sort of engaged training, engaged coaching, following that one-off training, which again you have to have as an engaging training in the first place. Otherwise, people aren't going to want to follow through without thinking it's an obligation. So, engage them with a great training first, and then follow up quarterly or semi-annually with some sort of case study or some sort of project that they can do, so that instead of just doing the training, retaining a lot of knowledge, and then it goes away quickly, every quarter you refill that gas tank practically. Comes back to you, you relearn some of the things you forgot, you reinforce those best practices from, say, this particular training. So then, they go on and then they use those tools more regularly. And then you follow up another quarter later and you do some other training that continues to reinforce those lessons they learned, so that every time you do that training, what kind of goes away, what you don't retain is less and less each time, so that you really can then pull back on the trainings and always just know that it's part of that knowledge base of our organization now. We still need to follow through and keep up with it. And we still need to refresh that every once in a while and introduce new growing terms and training styles and topics. But nonetheless, the follow through is key. It is something we do and is something our training team does, because without it, again, even a consultant comes in and says, here's your 3-ring binder, here's what we say you should do. That's not how we do it. But, at the end of the day, it sits there and collects dust. No follow through, no retention. And without that follow through, you're just not going to have it.
Yeah, ooh, I love that gas tank analogy because it's that open recognition of course, as you're going about your daily business, your gas is emptying itself because you're exerting yourself in all of those ways. And really the way that you talk about it, Michael, it just sounds like basic habit building is it does take those reps. We can't just assume, hey, we talk about it once and it's instantly going to be applied. You and I can't just build a gym habit by just saying, oh, we should go to the gym. Let's go one day. No, that's not how habits are built. So I really appreciate those insights. And I also knew that time was going to fly by, so I've got to put you on the spot one last time. It's the question that I always ask at the end of every single episode, and it's super broad. You can take it in any direction you want, but that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and as a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, I look at a couple different things. What has been something that's made my career successful? What's something that I continue to sharpen and try to better? And that's three things that have made FP360 and myself successful. It's one, listening to your customers, your clients, your partners, your friends. You need to listen more. There's just, it's something that's hard to do, myself included. But when you listen with customers and clients, they really engage with you. They tell you what you need. They do the job for you, and then you can help and support them better. And it makes the whole process smoother. So listening is number one. Good communication. I've been told I follow up with good communication a lot, from bosses to clients. And to me, that shouldn't be a compliment or a trophy. It should just be the day-to-day. Communicate, stay engaged, let them know that you're there to support them, and do that. And lastly, to follow up with that, the follow up, the follow through. You could sit there and listen to them. You could nod your head. You can talk them up, and you can try to sell them on what you do best. But if you don't follow through, that is going to be something that breaks your credibility. And really, it's pointless without that. So, that process is a key process for anyone. And if you do that and you put that towards what you're doing, whether you start a bakery, which I'm not good at, and I wish I could, but I have a great one near me, whether you play an instrument, or whether you work with someone and you're trying to help them out just, somewhere in your town. These are the three things that I think are something everyone should do. And it's hard for me to always do, but I remind myself all the time that that's what makes things right. And that's what makes us better people.
Yes, so well said, especially in a world where I feel like from the sales world, there's a lot of emphasis on following up. But Michael, I feel like that advice, I always love the advice that it's clear how you arrive there because it showed up so many times through our conversation today. Your emphasis on following through, it's so clear to me that is a core part of who you are and how you operate. And obviously you've injected that into FP360. So huge kudos to you. I'm very excited for listeners to go forth and see all of the amazing things that you've set up so intentionally and strategically inside your business to serve the people in the businesses that you serve. So Michael, for listeners who want to find FP360 and all the cool stuff that you're up to online, drop some links on us. So where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. I really appreciate the time today. I absolutely realized time flew by. I know we could keep going, but nonetheless, for anyone looking more, again, we're at fp360group.com. We do have a LinkedIn as well, FP360. So that's where a lot of our thought leadership, a lot of our interesting things and case studies come. So, happy to help anyone, happy to just chat. Love talking shop, always have and always will. So really appreciate the conversation today.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. You can scroll right on down. You don't have to memorize anything. If you're driving or if you're on the go, just click straight through from the show notes. Otherwise, Michael, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Have a good one.